responses to our communications and complaints. I will give you some examples in cases of emergency. Some people do not have their basic needs met in these cases of emergency. So therefore, we need to further develop the current mechanisms in place. We need to add to these mechanisms additional procedures and measures which would guarantee the enjoyment of these rights. I will move to another point. Most Arab countries, except for Lebanon, ratified the International Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And my question is, to what extent have our countries established the committee in charge of follow-up and monitoring? Have our countries fulfilled their obligations under this committee? And if these committees are established, are they truly independent, and do they operate in a genuinely democratic environment, and can they express their opinions? So we need to further strengthen these mechanisms under the current circumstances. Finally, I would like to talk about support for executive bodies. We need to support the executive bodies of the national human rights institutions. This should be binding and compulsory. These institutions and their bodies should be genuinely supported so that they could fulfill their role. And this should be beyond dispute. Thank you, Mrs. Silvana, for your recommendations. I believe that there are several common recommendations that have been put forward so far. I have one last point to make. It's about the harmonization of information so that they are communicated to people with disabilities, people with hearing or visual impairment. So serious efforts should be exerted on this front in order to ensure this access of information. When we talk about a digital language and its associated requirements. Thank you, Mrs. Silvana. I would like now to give the floor to Judge Maysam Nouairi, the former Director General of the Ministry of Justice. Are you ready? And now you are working with Justicia. Your Excellency, Your Honor, please go ahead. Thank you, Mrs. Ruwaida. Of course, I will go directly to the point, and I will share with you my recommendations. All our sessions aim to promote human rights and to promote international cooperation to support national mechanisms for implementation, reporting, and follow-up. I will address the concerned stakeholders involved in human rights. Actually, all stakeholders are involved in this issue. So please allow me, we are talking about recommendations now. Can you just focus on recommendations? Yes, sure, the judge is saying. Actually, there are a series of recommendations. We should focus on the juvenile offenders of the law and the juveniles who are at risk. The Lebanese juvenile law address those cases of juveniles at risk, i.e. the juveniles who are not yet offenders. If we want to promote human rights, we need to protect the juvenile at risk or juvenile offenders. This is essential because this requires also providing support to the juvenile's milieu and environment, including his parents. So in practical terms, to promote the human rights, we need to respect the rights of those juveniles as a key member of society. Second, now that we are talking about the national mechanisms, we have a problem at the level of implementation, reporting, and follow-up. Therefore, to be practical, implementation, reporting, and follow-up implementation, reporting, and follow-up responsibilities should be vested in an entity or in a body that has full-fledged authority to exercise its implementation, reporting, and follow-up mandate. So, for instance, at the Ministry of Justice in Lebanon, we have a juvenile department that has an official authority. It also cooperates with civil society organizations, and it engages with national and international NGOs. Therefore, we should focus on cooperation through this department. This department also cooperates with a wide array of ministries in order to strengthen human rights, particularly for the juveniles. Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Honor, Judge Nuwairi. I would like now to move to our other speakers. Do any of the speakers want to make a comment? In addition to Ambassador Caroline Ziadeh. So I'm not sure if any of our speakers today would like to make a comment or have a feedback before I give the floor um, to Mr. Muhammad Abdel Manam, Chair of the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Please go ahead, Mr. Haysam. Thank you very much. I was very pleased as I listened to recommendations from Yemen's civil society. Of course, when I joined my work at the international organizations and reports department, I came from a civil society background and I worked for 15 years with civil society organizations. So I've received a recommendation about engaging civil society organizations in Yemen in preparing reports. Of course, we would like to add the prestigious networks of Yemeni civil society organizations because some networks also operate overseas. So a recommendation is to engage the networks of civil society organizations operating in Yemen. I mentioned, for instance, the civil network that includes together more than 20 CSOs in Yemen. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Qasim, and we will take this recommendation into consideration. I would like to thank all the participants and all the speakers in this session. I would like to thank you, especially that 15 out of 22 Arab League member states have joined these consultations. Please allow me to thank you all. I will list the countries that participated in the past 2 days: Morocco, Tunisia, the UAE, Jordan, Libya, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Syria, Qatar, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, Palestine, Egypt. So these are the countries that participated in the regional consultations. We had around 90 participants on the first day and more than 90 participants on the second day. Of course, we will share with you the recommendations with the final assessment. I would like to thank all those who participated in these 2-day regional consultations. Our biggest thanks goes to Mr. Ibrahim Salama and to the UN High Commissioner. I would like to thank our team in the regional office. So I would like to thank everyone, including Mrs. Lynn Aid. Were it not for your immense efforts, Lynn, the consultations wouldn't have been held over the past 2 days and the consultations wouldn't have been successful. So again, I would like to thank all the team members and all the unknown soldiers. I would like to thank the experts, the representatives of state, civil society organizations, ambassadors, and representatives of national human rights institutions. I would like to thank all the dear friends. And finally, I will give the floor to Mr. Muhammad Azzeddin Abdel Munham. My dear colleague, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. At the outset, I would like to extend my special thanks to Mrs. Ruwaida Al-Haj and to her colleagues in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in the Middle East and North Africa. Thank you for this immense good organization of these regional consultations. I believe your efforts during these consultations are a model to be followed by other regional offices. I know that coordination is tough in different aspects and walks of life, not only in the human rights area. And as our consultations have demonstrated during these 2 days, the coordination burden is overwhelming. And to be frank with you, this burden will multiply, will increase. It will not become lighter because the mechanisms are more demanding and will become more demanding whether we like it or not. But we should remember that this burden that we share when it comes to coordination in the human rights area seeks to serve a noble and sublime goal, which is ensuring a decent life for all without discrimination and distinction. The ultimate aim is also to guarantee the freedom and dignity of all. When we put this sublime goal in mind, we will be able to manage this burden, especially that at the end of the day we are serving this noble goal. I have 3 points actually to make. And they are not actual recommendations, but I'm putting them out for you, and it's up to you to look at them the way you want, whether you want to consider them as recommendations or not. One, the existing mechanisms that are based on coordination in human rights areas should be inextricably linked to development and development programs. This is essential and crucial, regardless of whether development is of an economic or social or political nature. So these are the three dimensions of development programs and plans. In my opinion, the existing mechanisms in the Arab region for coordination in human rights areas can bring added value, and their inputs can be taken into consideration when elaborating development plans. I would like to mention in particular Article 6.2 of the right to work. Actually, this article is seldom focused on because it refers to development within a human rights framework. So this article could be included in the recommendations or could be seen as another insight or another perspective that should be taken into consideration when discussing coordination mechanisms. Second, the database. The more comprehensive and accurate the database is, the weaker the coordination burden. So, do we have a model database that applies to all? If we do not have this database now, then we can take this into consideration in the period to come. In particular, when it comes to the database, I would like to emphasize the importance of statistics. Statistics should be comprehensive as much as possible and should take account of a base year. So they should start from a base year, i.e., the year of the first initial or preliminary report that was submitted to any of the human rights mechanisms. This will definitely make it easier for other mechanisms, and this will make it easier also for the coordination bodies to fulfill their mandate in the member states. Of course, there may be some obstacles, but all obstacles can be overcome. Obstacle has to do perhaps with the number of pages, but we are not talking about more than 40 pages. So statistics can be added as an annex or an addendum. They could be posted online and preferably in English, so that they are not translated into other languages, and translation may be time consuming. Thirdly, I would like to focus on follow-up or follow-up reports. As you know, The mechanisms concerned with the coordination know that follow-up reports focus on the 3 or 4 priority issues. This has been the case for some time now, but it's recommended when preparing follow-up reports, which also require comprehensive coordination between different civil society organizations and state institutions. So when preparing these reports, it's recommended to take into account these issues, the 3 or 4 priority issues, as well as the general framework or the general context of the report. For instance, if we are talking about a report on the International Covenant on Political, Social, and Cultural Rights, then the context should be taken into account when one question is being responded to. So different articles should be taken into consideration when responses are prepared. When the adequate standards of living are downgraded or so on, then this could be a reason why the right to health is not enjoyed by all. So therefore, in the follow-up reports, the responses should be mindful of the general framework and the general context within which the report is submitted. So these are the points I have to make. They could serve as recommendations or they could serve as additional insights to you.
كل من أسهم بمداخلة في
I'd like to extend my deepest thanks to all those that contributed to these consultations and interventions. I have learned a lot from these consultations, and I will convey a lot of important points to my colleagues at the Social, Economic, and Cultural Committee. They will all be taken into account, and even we will inspire from them in our work. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Ruwaita Al-Haj, to all colleagues at the regional office of the OHCHR in Beirut for these 2 fruitful days that gave very important results for a noble objective that we are all working for, which is decent living for all humans. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you for the approach as related to development that we might have forgotten in these 2 days. Now I will give the floor to Mrs. Lynn Eid. Thank you very much, Mrs. Ruwaida. Thank you, Mr. Abdel Menhem. Thank you to all the speakers, ladies and gentlemen from member states and representatives of civil society organizations and national institutions, and the guests that have taken the floor. Hopefully, we will be gathering all the recommendations during the last day and today, and we will share them with you. Should you have any comments before integrating them in the final report that we will be submitting to the Human Rights Council on these regional consultations, please do so. Thank you very much. We extend our greetings from OHCHR to you all speakers and participants. Thank you. ايه